Her shorn scalp burning with shame, Sarah clutched her starving infant son as blood trickled down her neck, all hope lost after her husband's family had banished her to die in the wilderness. The tall Apache warrior's shadow fell across her crumpled form, his words neither kind nor cruel as he stated with quiet certainty, "You're coming with me." Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Montana Territory, summer of 1878. The dust swirled around Sarah Mitchell's feet as she stumbled along the outskirts of Blackwater Creek, her swollen eyes barely able to see the path ahead. The harsh summer sun beat down mercilessly upon her exposed scalp, raw and burning where her long auburn hair had been only hours before. In her arms, she clutched a small bundle that whimpered softly against her chest. Thomas, barely 2 weeks old, oblivious to the shame and cruelty that had befallen his mother. "Witch," they had called her. "Bringer of death," they had whispered, as Eleanor Mitchell, her mother-in-law, had taken the shears to her hair while Sarah's hands were bound behind her back. "James would still be alive if not for you," the older woman had spat, her grief-twisted face hovering inches from Sarah's as the last lock of hair fell to the ground. Her husband of just 11 months had succumbed to fever 3 days after their son's birth. The Mitchell family, prominent settlers who owned half the businesses in Blackwater Creek, had been quick to assign blame. A woman who couldn't save her husband had no place raising his heir, they'd declared. They'd given her until sundown to leave their property, their town, their lives, without her child. But Sarah had refused to be separated from Thomas. While the family prepared for James's funeral, she had slipped away, taking only her son, the clothes on her back, and a small pouch of dried beef that the kitchen maid had secretly pressed into her hand. Now, her legs trembled beneath her, weak from childbirth and exhaustion. The water skin she'd filled at the creek's edge was already half empty. Thomas needed milk she could barely provide, her body depleted from stress and insufficient food. She had nowhere to go, no family to turn to. Her own parents had passed years ago, leaving her alone until she'd met James at a town social and fallen for his gentle smile and kind words. "I just need to get to the next settlement," she whispered to her son. Though she knew Fort Madison was at least 3 days' walk, and she had no hope of surviving such a journey in her condition. When she spotted the small pond nestled between a cluster of cottonwoods, Sarah nearly wept with relief. She could rest there, cool Thomas's flushed skin, perhaps even sleep for a moment. She didn't notice the figure watching from the ridge above, his eyes following her stumbling progress toward the water. Sarah collapsed beside the pond, carefully laying Thomas on her shawl before cupping her hands to drink. The water was cool and sweet, momentarily washing away the taste of dust and despair. With trembling fingers, she dampened a corner of the shawl and gently cleaned her son's face. He blinked up at her with eyes so like his father's that her heart constricted painfully in her chest. "I'll keep you safe," she promised, though she had no idea how. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her stiffen. Had the Mitchells sent someone after her? Had they changed their minds about letting her leave with Thomas? She scrambled to gather her son, but her weakened limbs betrayed her. By the time she struggled to her feet, the rider had already dismounted and stood less than 10 paces away. He was tall, his copper skin gleaming in the late afternoon sun, black hair falling in a straight curtain past his shoulders. The fringed leather of his leggings and vest marked him as clearly as the eagle feather tied at his temple, Apache. Sarah clutched Thomas tighter, her heart hammering against her ribs. Stories of Indian raids and captives had been told around every hearth in Blackwater Creek, yet something in the man's steady gaze held no threat. He moved forward with the fluid grace of a predator, stopping just beyond arm's reach. His eyes took in her brutally shorn head, the raw scratches on her arms where they'd held her down, the infant clutched protectively against her breast. "You are running," he said in English far more precise than she'd expected. Sarah didn't answer, couldn't find words through her fear. The Apache warrior glanced back toward Blackwater Creek, then at the vast, empty land beyond. When he turned to her again, his expression had softened almost imperceptibly. "You're coming with me," he said, not a question, but a simple statement of fact. And to her own surprise, Sarah found herself nodding. Sarah stood frozen, her son clutched to her chest as the Apache warrior led his horse closer. Every tale of savage raids and stolen women she'd ever heard crashed through her mind, yet the alternative, wandering the wilderness until they both perished, seemed equally grim. She studied his face, searching for cruelty, but finding only a weathered dignity in his features. "My people camp 3 ridges east," he said, his voice deep and measured. "Your child needs shelter. You need medicine." His eyes lingered on her raw scalp, the angry red skin where Eleanor's shears had cut too close in her vindictive fury. "They'll come looking for me," Sarah whispered. "For him." She glanced down at Thomas. "He's a Mitchell." The warrior's expression didn't change. "I am Takoda. It means friend to all." He offered this information as if presenting credentials. "I saw what they did to you in the town. No mother deserves such shame." Sarah swallowed hard. The thought that he had witnessed her humiliation, being dragged to the town square, accused of bringing illness to the Mitchell home through her city ways, having her hair shorn while neighbors watched, made her cheeks burn despite her exhaustion. Takoda reached into a pouch at his waist and extended his hand. In his palm lay strips of dried meat. "Eat first, then we ride." The simple kindness nearly undid her. Her fingers trembled as she accepted the offering, the dried venison tough but nourishing. She hadn't eaten since fleeing at dawn. "Why would you help me?" she asked, watching him carefully. Takoda was silent for a moment, his gaze lifting to the horizon. "My sister died in childbirth last winter. Her husband refused help from white medicine man in town." His jaw tightened. "Now my nephew grows without mother." He knelt beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "The Great Spirit shows me a mother and child in need. I listen." The simplicity of his explanation struck Sarah deeply. In Blackwater Creek, no action came without strings, no kindness without expectation of return. Yet here was this man, this savage, according to everything she'd been taught, offering help based solely on what he believed was right. "I don't even know where we're going," she said, her voice catching. "To my people, the Bedonkohe band. We camp near the mountains until autumn." He gestured east. 2 hours ride. Your son will have milk from the goats. You will have healing herbs for your skin." Sarah looked down at Thomas, his tiny face flushed from the heat. She had no illusions about their chances alone. Even if she somehow reached Fort Madison, what awaited her there? A life of scrubbing floors and hiding her shame, always looking over her shoulder for the Mitchells. "All right," she whispered, the word feeling like surrender and rebellion all at once. Takoda nodded once, then moved to his horse. It was a magnificent animal, a dappled gray stallion with intelligent eyes. He adjusted the blanket on its back, then turned to her. "You ride, I walk." "Both of us?" Sarah asked, uncertain how she would manage with Thomas. In answer, Takoda created a makeshift sling from a length of woven cloth, showing her how to secure Thomas against her chest. His hands never touched her, maintaining a careful distance even as he demonstrated the technique. "It will hold him safe," he explained. "Apache women carry their babies this way while gathering or traveling." The sling cradled Thomas securely, freeing Sarah's arms. When Takoda helped her onto the horse, his support was firm but impersonal, lasting only as long as necessary to ensure she was balanced. The stallion shifted beneath her, and Sarah grabbed the mane in momentary panic. It had been years since she'd ridden, and never astride like this. Takoda spoke softly to the horse in his native tongue, and the animal stilled immediately. As they began their journey eastward, Sarah cast one last glance toward Blackwater Creek. The town's buildings were just visible in the distance, including the Grand Mitchell house on the hill where she had lived as a bride for less than a year. She touched Thomas's head through the sling and faced forward, toward the unknown. The terrain grew steeper as they traveled eastward, the grasslands giving way to rocky foothills. Takoda walked steadily ahead, one hand holding the stallion's lead rope. Occasionally, he would stop to listen, his head tilted towards some sound beyond Sarah's perception before continuing onward. The rhythmic sway of the horse lulled Thomas to sleep, his tiny body warm against her chest. As they crested a ridge, Sarah winced as her torn scalp burned beneath the relentless sun. She had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. Her hair had been her pride once, thick auburn waves that James had loved to touch. Now she was marked, branded as cursed, unworthy. Takoda glanced back, his dark eyes taking in her discomfort. Without breaking stride, he untied a small bundle from his belt and passed it to her. "Crush leaves, put on skin," he instructed. "Will cool burning." Inside the bundle were soft green leaves that released a minty fragrance when she rubbed them between her fingers. Hesitantly, Sarah applied the crushed leaves to her scalp, sighing with relief as a blessed coolness spread across the raw skin. "Thank you," she murmured. Takoda acknowledged her gratitude with a slight nod, his expression unchanged. Yet Sarah sensed something in his demeanor, not pity, which would have been unbearable, but a quiet understanding of suffering. "What will your people think?" she asked after a while, voicing the fear that had been building with each step. "About bringing a white woman to your camp?" Takoda was silent for several moments. "Some will welcome, some will not." He looked back at her with unwavering honesty. "But Chief Nakohe respects the old ways. A mother with child must be protected, no matter her skin. And if they refuse, they will not refuse." His voice carried absolute certainty. "I am son of the war chief. My word has weight." This revelation startled Sarah. The man walking beside her, dressed in simple buckskins, with only a knife and a small pouch at his belt, was a leader among his people. Nothing in his manner suggested pride or authority, yet there was an unmistakable dignity in how he carried himself. "There was a time," Takoda continued unexpectedly, "when Apache and white settlers lived separate but at peace, trade sometimes, not friends but not enemies." "What changed?" Sarah asked. His face hardened slightly. "Broken promises, stolen land, disease." He glanced at Thomas sleeping in his sling. "Still, a child knows nothing of this history. Your son will be welcomed." As the afternoon shadows lengthened, they entered a narrow canyon. The temperature dropped as the sun disappeared behind high rock walls. Takoda slowed his pace, gesturing for quiet. Sarah tensed, clutching Thomas tighter against her chest. Had he led her into a trap after all? Then she saw them. 4 mounted warriors positioned on an outcropping above, bows strung and ready. Their faces were painted with red and black streaks, their expressions unreadable as they studied the newcomers. Takoda raised his hand in greeting, calling out several phrases in his native tongue. One of the warriors responded sharply, his gaze fixed on Sarah. The exchange continued, growing more heated. Sarah couldn't understand the words, but the tension was unmistakable. Finally, Takoda turned to her. "They question why I bring white woman to our camp. Say you bring soldiers behind you." Sarah's heart sank. "I won't, I swear it." Takoda nodded, then spoke again to the warriors. He pointed to her shorn head, to the sleeping infant. The oldest of the 4 men leaned forward on his horse, studying Sarah intently before responding with a curt nod. "We may pass," Dakota explained. "But Keme, my cousin, says you must be blindfolded. Our camp location is sacred." Fear flickered through Sarah, but she quashed it. "I understand." Dakota approached with a strip of soft leather. "I will lead horse. You will be safe." As the blindfold was secured around her eyes, plunging her into darkness, Sarah felt Thomas stir against her chest. He whimpered softly, and she hummed a lullaby, trying to calm him and herself. "Not much farther," Dakota assured her. "Soon you will have food, water, rest." The stallion moved forward again, guided by Dakota's steady hand. Without sight, Sarah's other senses heightened. She smelled pine and juniper, heard the soft calls of unfamiliar birds, felt the air grow cooler and damper as they descended into what must be a sheltered valley. When the blindfold was finally removed, the last golden rays of sunset illuminated a scene unlike anything Sarah had ever witnessed. A hidden valley stretched before them, sheltered by steep rock walls and ancient pines. The Apache camp consisted of perhaps 30 wickiups, dome-shaped dwellings covered with brush and hides, arranged in a circular pattern around a central clearing. Small cooking fires dotted the encampment, their smoke rising in thin blue columns against the darkening sky. Children paused in their play to stare, women stopped grinding corn, and warriors straightened from their tasks as Dakota led Sarah into their midst. Thomas began to cry, his thin wail cutting through the silence. Sarah rocked him gently, acutely aware of dozens of eyes studying her every move. She felt naked, exposed beyond even her shorn head, a stranger in an alien world. "Dismount," Dakota said quietly. "Walk with head up. Show no fear." Sarah slid awkwardly from the horse, her legs trembling after the long journey. She cradled Thomas against her shoulder, patting his back soothingly as Dakota addressed the gathering crowd in his native tongue. She heard him say her name, heard the word for baby, recognized nothing else. From a large wickiup near the center of camp emerged an elderly man, his face deeply lined, his hair gray but still thick and braided with eagle feathers. His eyes, dark and penetrating, fixed first on Dakota, then on Sarah. "My father, Chief Nakohe," Dakota explained. "He will decide." The chief approached slowly, leaning on a wooden staff adorned with beads and feathers. He studied Sarah without speaking, then turned to his son with sharp, questioning words. Dakota responded respectfully but firmly. As they spoke, a tall, broad-shouldered warrior emerged from the crowd. Unlike the others, whose expressions ranged from curiosity to wariness, his face was twisted with open hostility. He interrupted the chief's conversation, gesturing angrily toward Sarah. "Keme says you should have been left for coyotes," Dakota translated, his voice neutral. "Says, white woman brings death to our people." Before Sarah could respond, an elderly woman pushed through the gathering. She wore a simple buckskin dress adorned with intricate beadwork, her silver hair braided and wrapped with strips of red cloth. Without hesitation, she approached Sarah and reached for Thomas. Sarah instinctively pulled back, clutching her son tighter. "Nijoni is our healer," Dakota said quietly. "She wishes to see if child is healthy." After a moment's hesitation, Sarah loosened her grip, allowing the old woman to examine Thomas. Nijoni's weathered hands were gentle as she unwrapped the swaddling cloth, checking the infant's limbs, peering into his eyes. She spoke softly to the baby in her native tongue, her voice melodic and soothing. To Sarah's surprise, Thomas quieted, his blue eyes fixed on the woman's face. Finally, Nizoni looked directly at Sarah's raw, exposed scalp. Without asking permission, she reached up and lightly touched the tender skin, causing Sarah to flinch. The old woman clucked her tongue, then turned to the chief, speaking rapidly. "What is she saying?" Sarah whispered to Dakota. "She says your son is strong but hungry. Says you need healing herbs and goat's milk." A hint of what might have been amusement crossed his face. "Says only fools harm mothers with newborns." Chief Nakohe listened to the healer, then to the still protesting Keme, before finally raising his hand for silence. The entire camp stilled, awaiting his judgment. He studied Sarah for what seemed an eternity before speaking, his deep voice carrying across the clearing. Takoda translated. "My father says you may stay until your head heals and your strength returns. You will share Nijoni's wiki up. You will learn our ways while here." He paused. "And you will not bring death to our camp." Relief flooded through Sarah. "Tell him I'm grateful. Tell him I won't bring trouble." As Takoda relayed her words, Keme spat on the ground and stalked away, followed by several younger warriors. Their distrust was palpable, a reminder that her welcome hung by the thinnest of threads. Nijoni approached again, this time gesturing for Sarah to follow her. As they crossed the camp, women and children drew back, some making signs to ward off evil, others simply watching with undisguised curiosity. The healer's wickiup was larger than most, positioned near a small stream that flowed along the eastern edge of the camp. Inside, fragrant herbs hung from the ceiling poles and soft furs covered the ground. Nijoni pointed to a space where Sarah could sit, then disappeared outside, returning moments later with a small clay bowl of milk. "For baby," she said in heavily accented English, startling Sarah. "Drink. Grow strong." Sarah hadn't realized how desperately hungry Thomas was until he began suckling eagerly from the bowl Nijoni held to his lips. As she watched her son feed, the full weight of the day crashed down upon her. Exhaustion, fear, grief, all of it swelled in her throat until she could no longer contain it. Silent tears streamed down her face as darkness settled over the Apache camp. Dawn broke over the valley in pale ribbons of light. Sarah awoke disoriented, her body aching from sleeping on the ground. For a moment, panic seized her as she reached for Thomas, before her fingers found his warm body nestled beside her in a small cradle of woven reeds that hadn't been there the night before. She breathed deeply, taking in the earthy scent of the wickiup, the pungent aroma of drying herbs hanging overhead. Nijoni was already gone, but a small pot of what looked like porridge sat warming near the banked fire. Sarah's stomach growled at the sight. She had eaten nothing but a few strips of dried meat since leaving Blackwater Creek. Outside, the camp was alive with morning activities. Women moved between wickiups carrying water skins. Children chased each other through the central clearing, and warriors gathered in small groups, some tending weapons, others preparing to hunt. Several people paused to stare at her, but none approached. "You slept long. Good for healing." Sarah turned to find Takoda standing nearby, his expression unreadable as always. She self-consciously touched her head, feeling the thin layer of salve Nijoni had applied to her scalp the night before. "Thank you for the cradle," she said. Takoda shook his head. "Not me. Nijoni says proper baby needs proper bed." A young woman appeared at Nijoni's doorway, carrying a water skin. She was perhaps 17, with a delicate face and eyes that reminded Sarah of Takoda's. She avoided looking directly at Sarah as she placed the water near the entrance. "My niece, Tallulah," Takoda explained, "daughter of my sister who died." The girl darted away before Sarah could speak to her. "She seems afraid of me." "Not afraid. Cautious. She has never spoken to white woman before." Takoda gestured toward the porridge. "Eat, then Nijoni will show you camp duties." "Camp duties?" Sarah echoed. "All who live here work here," he said simply. "Even guests." The message was clear. She would not be coddled. In truth, Sarah was relieved. Idleness would only leave her dwelling on everything she had lost, everyone who had betrayed her. Nijoni returned while Sarah was feeding Thomas. The old woman nodded approvingly at the empty porridge bowl, then beckoned Sarah to follow her. With Thomas secured in the sling Takoda had made, Sarah stepped into the bright morning sunlight. Her first task was gathering water from the stream. Nijoni showed her how to carry a clay pot balanced on her hip, a skill Sarah mastered only after several embarrassing spills. Next came grinding corn between two large stones, the coarse meal collected in a shallow basket. Her soft hands blistered quickly, unused to such labor. Throughout the morning, Sarah was acutely aware of being watched, not just by the openly curious children, but by women who pretended not to notice her while keeping her constantly in sight. Kemi and his followers observed from across the clearing, their hostility palpable even at a distance. When Thomas began to fuss, Nijoni brought a nursing mother to their wickiup. The young Apache woman regarded Sarah warily, but allowed the white infant to suckle alongside her own child. The sight brought tears to Sarah's eyes, such kindness alongside such suspicion. By midday, Sarah's entire body ached. She sat beside the stream, dipping her raw hands in the cool water when a shadow fell across her. She looked up to find Tallulah standing there, clutching a small bundle. "For baby," the girl said softly, her English halting but clear. She held out what appeared to be a tiny pair of moccasins, beautifully crafted from soft deer skin. Sarah accepted the gift with trembling hands. "Thank you. They're beautiful." Tallulah hesitated, then asked, "Your husband, he died like my mother?" "Not in childbirth," Sarah answered carefully, "but yes, he died soon after my son was born." The girl's dark eyes studied her shorn head. "Why they cut your hair?" "Apache cut hair for mourning, not punishment." "They blamed me for his death," Sarah whispered. "Said I brought sickness to their house." Tallulah frowned. "White people not understand sickness comes from spirits, not people." She pointed to Thomas, sleeping peacefully in his reed cradle. "Baby strong, you strong too." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Sarah stunned by the unexpected connection. She carefully tucked the tiny moccasins beside Thomas, one small treasure in a world that had taken everything else. That evening, as shadows lengthened across the valley, Sarah spotted Takoda returning with a hunting party. For the first time since she'd met him, he smiled, a brief, small curving of his lips as he held up a string of rabbits. Something fluttered unexpectedly in her chest at the sight, and in that moment, in a camp full of strangers, Sarah realized she was no longer simply surviving, she was beginning to live again. The days stretched into weeks, each one bleeding into the next with a rhythm unlike anything Sarah had known. Her blistered hands toughened, her sun-darkened arms grew stronger, and a fine layer of auburn fuzz began to cover her scalp. Thomas thrived, his cheeks rounding, his cries growing more robust. He had become a favorite among the Apache women, who took turns holding him while Sarah worked, cooing to him in their native language. Even Kim's hostility had receded somewhat, though his dark eyes still followed her movements through camp with suspicion. He had not spoken to her directly, but neither had he continued to openly call for her banishment. On this particular morning, Takoda found Sarah kneeling by the stream, scraping a deer hide with a sharpened stone tool. Her movements were still awkward compared to the Apache women, but she worked with determined concentration. "You learn quickly," he observed, squatting beside her. Sarah paused, brushing a strand of her growing hair from her eyes. "I have good teachers." She nodded toward Nijoni and two other women working nearby. "Though I'll never be as skilled as they are." "Different hands, same purpose," Takoda replied. He studied her work critically. "Hide will make good moccasins." Sarah smiled, a genuine expression that came more easily now. "I hope so. My boots won't last much longer." She gestured to the worn leather footwear that had carried her from Blackwater Creek. Takoda nodded. "Come, I show you something." Curious, Sarah set aside her scraping tool and followed him toward the edge of camp. Thomas was with Tallulah, who had taken to carrying him in a cradleboard on her back, singing Apache lullabies to him as she went about her chores. They walked in companionable silence until they reached a sun-drenched clearing where several Apache women were gathered around what appeared to be shallow pits dug into the earth. The pits contained various colored mixtures: yellow, red, blue, and black. Dyes, Takoda explained, from plants, stones, bark, for decorating clothing, baskets. One of the older women, Apache, looked up as they approached. She had been among the first to welcome Sarah after Nijoni's acceptance, teaching her the proper way to prepare corn and collect wild onions. "I thought perhaps you might want to learn," Takoda said, "for when your hide is ready." Sarah was touched by his thoughtfulness. "I'd like that very much." Apache patted the ground beside her, and Sarah sat down, watching intently as the woman demonstrated how to grind roots for yellow dye, crush berries for blue, mix clay for red. The other women initially stiffened at Sarah's presence, but gradually relaxed as she showed genuine interest in their craft. Takoda left them to their work, but Sarah felt his gaze on her from across the clearing where he spoke with several warriors. Something had shifted between them in recent days, a quiet understanding, a mutual respect that occasionally hinted at deeper possibilities. Later that afternoon, as Sarah returned to Nijoni's wickiup with a small pouch of yellow dye powder, she heard raised voices near the camp's entrance. Quickening her pace, she arrived to find Kime confronting Takoda, his stance aggressive, his voice sharp. "What's happening?" she asked Tallulah, who stood nearby with Thomas still secured to her back. "Scouts saw white men near Western Ridge," the girl explained, her expression worried. "Looking for someone." Sarah's blood ran cold. "The Mitchells? Kame thinks you send signal. Lead them here." Tallulah's voice dropped to a whisper. "He wants to send you away before they find camp." Sarah's first instinct was to flee, to grab Thomas and run before she brought danger to these people who had shown her such unexpected kindness. But where would she go? How would she survive? Before she could decide, Chief Nakohe emerged from his wickiup, silencing the argument with a raised hand. He spoke at length, his weathered face grave. Takoda responded respectfully, occasionally gesturing toward Sarah. Finally, Takoda approached her. 3 white men search nearby valleys. One rides horse with Mitchell brand. Sarah's legs weakened. "They're looking for Thomas." "Yes, my father believes they will not stop searching." "What will happen to us?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Takoda's expression remained stoic, but his eyes held a warmth that steadied her. "You stay here, hidden. We move camp deeper into mountains tomorrow at dawn. But I've brought trouble to your people, just as Kime said I would." "Trouble finds all people," Takoda replied. "Apache know how to hide from white man's eyes, have done so for generations." That night, the camp was alive with quiet, efficient activity as the tribe prepared to relocate. Sarah worked alongside Nijoni, helping to pack medicinal herbs and cooking utensils. Thomas slept peacefully, unaware of the turmoil his existence had caused in 2 very different worlds. Near midnight, as Sarah finally lay down to rest, Takoda appeared at the entrance to Nijoni's wickiup. The old woman had already departed to assist the chief, leaving Sarah alone with the baby. "May I enter?" he asked formally. Sarah nodded, sitting up and pulling her blanket around her shoulders. Takoda settled across from her, the small fire between them casting dancing shadows across his strong features. "I have question," he said after a moment. "If Mitchell men find you, what happens to Thomas?" Sarah's arms tightened instinctively around her sleeping son. "They'll take him, raise him as a Mitchell, tell him I abandoned him, or worse, that I died." Her voice broke. "They'll erase me from his life." Takoda's gaze didn't waver, as he studied Sarah's face in the firelight. "And what do you want for Thomas? For his future?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked what she wanted since James's death. Not his family, not the townspeople who had watched her humiliation in silence. Her wishes had been deemed irrelevant, her motherhood secondary to the Mitchell name. "I want him to live," she said finally. "I want him to be kind and strong, to know he was loved." She touched Thomas's cheek gently. "I don't care if he's raised as white or Apache or something in between. I just want him to have a chance." Dakota nodded slowly. "My father has decided you and Thomas will travel in center of our group, protected. If white men find us, you hide. If they demand to search camp, we say no white woman here. They won't believe you." "They will not be given choice," Dakota replied, his meaning clear. The Apache would fight rather than surrender her. Sarah's chest tightened with the weight of this protection. "I don't want anyone to die because of me. This is not just about you." Dakota's voice remained steady. "Mitchell men cross Apache lands without permission, with weapons. This is old story. White men believe they own all they see." He rose to leave, then paused. "We depart before sunrise. Be ready." Long after Dakota had gone, Sarah sat awake, watching Thomas sleep. Could she allow these people to risk their lives for her son? Yet what choice did she have? To surrender to the Mitchells would mean losing Thomas forever. By first light, the camp had been dismantled with remarkable efficiency. Wickiups were taken apart, their frames bundled for transport. Essential belongings were loaded onto travois pulled by horses. Children were secured in cradle boards on their mothers' backs. Nothing was left behind that would reveal who had lived there or where they had gone. As promised, Sarah and Thomas were positioned in the center of the moving tribe. Nijoni walked beside her, occasionally supporting Sarah's elbow when the terrain grew steep. Tallulah carried Thomas in a cradle board, singing softly to keep him content. Ahead of them, Dakota and his warriors scouted the path, while Kemi and his men guarded the rear. They traveled higher into the mountains, following game trails so narrow that they sometimes had to proceed in single file. The air grew thinner, cooler, fragrant with pine and sage. By midday, they had reached a meadow surrounded by dense forest with a clear stream cutting through its center. "We rest here," Nijoni said, helping Sarah settle beneath the shade of a towering pine. "Drink water, eat." Sarah accepted a strip of dried venison, chewing it slowly as she nursed Thomas. Across the meadow, she could see Dakota in deep conversation with his father and several elder warriors. Their expressions were grave. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked when Tallulah approached. "Scouts report white men follow our trail," the girl said, her voice low. "Not just Mitchell men now, soldiers too." Sarah's blood ran cold. Soldiers? But why would the army involve themselves in a family dispute? "Dakota thinks Mitchell men tell soldiers Apache steal white woman and baby," Tallulah explained. "Make it army problem." It was a clever strategy, one that turned Sarah's personal tragedy into a potential military conflict. The Mitchells had always been influential, but she hadn't realized they could command the attention of Fort Madison's garrison so easily. Chief Nakohe approached, his weathered face solemn as he addressed Sarah directly. "My son says you are woman of honor," he said in halting English, "that you choose to stay with us freely." Sarah nodded. "Yes, you've shown me kindness when my own people showed none." The chief's dark eyes seemed to look straight through her. "If soldiers come, they will not believe woman chooses Apache over white man. They will think we force you. They will kill my warriors to rescue you." The truth of his words struck her like a physical blow. No matter what she said, the soldiers would see only what they expected to see. A white captive in need of salvation from savage Indians. "What can I do?" she asked. "We have decision to make," the chief replied. Continue together into mountains where soldiers will follow, or, he hesitated, or separate, Dakota finished, joining them. You, Thomas, and I go north to Bitterroot Valley. Rest of tribe goes east to Winter Grounds. Divide their forces, Sarah realized aloud. Dakota nodded. Soldiers follow larger group. Mitchell men may follow us. But they'll still be searching for a white woman, Sarah said. They'll recognize me immediately. Nijoni, who had been listening silently, stepped forward. From a small pouch at her waist, she removed a vial of dark liquid. Not if you no longer look white, she said. Sarah understood. The plant dyes they had been working with yesterday. They could stain her skin, disguise her appearance. She would become, at least outwardly, Apache. It will not wash away quickly, Nijoni warned. Many days, maybe weeks. Sarah looked from the vial to Thomas, to Dakota's impassive face. The choice before her was monumental, to temporarily surrender her identity, to trust her life and her sons to this man and his plan. If we're discovered, she asked Dakota, what happens then? His eyes met hers, unwavering. I protect you and Thomas with my life. Sarah took a deep breath and nodded to Nijoni. Do it. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, Nijoni and several women worked carefully to transform Sarah's appearance. They applied the walnut-based dye to every visible inch of her pale skin, darkening it to a rich copper tone. They dressed her in Apache clothing, a simple buckskin dress adorned with subtle beadwork, leggings, and the moccasins she had helped create. They oiled her short auburn hair until it appeared nearly black in the fading light. Around her neck, they placed a necklace of carved bone and turquoise, a symbol of belonging. When they finished, Tallulah held up a polished piece of metal for Sarah to see her reflection. The woman who stared back was a stranger, yet somehow also herself laid bare, stripped of everything she had once been. Before dawn, Sarah stood with Thomas cradled against her chest, watching the tribe prepare for their separate journeys. Tallulah approached, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I will miss little Thomas, she said, touching the baby's cheek gently. And you, sister. The word caught Sarah by surprise. When had she ceased being the outsider, the white woman to be tolerated? Somehow, through shared work and hardship, she had become something else to these people, a friend, a sister. I'll miss you too, Sarah replied, her voice thick with emotion. Nijoni came forward next, pressing a small deerskin pouch into Sarah's hand. Medicine for baby, for fever, for cough. Her weathered fingers closed over Sarah's. You are strong woman. Remember this when path seems dark. Even Kimi approached. His usual scowl softened slightly. He spoke briefly to Dakota, then nodded once to Sarah before turning away. She glanced questioningly at Dakota. He says you have courage for white woman, Dakota translated with the barest hint of amusement. High praise from Keme. Chief Nakohe was the last to bid them farewell. He placed his hands on Thomas's head, speaking softly in Apache, a blessing, Sarah realized. Then he gripped his son's shoulder, their foreheads touching briefly in a gesture of profound respect. Be careful, my son, the chief said in English, glancing at Sarah. Some treasures are worth great risk. As the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky, they departed, the tribe heading east toward their winter grounds, while Dakota led Sarah and Thomas north along a barely visible game trail. Sarah rode Dakota's dappled stallion, Thomas secured in his cradleboard against her chest. Dakota walked ahead, leading the horse with one hand, his rifle ready in the other. The morning passed in tense silence as they climbed higher into the mountains, the air growing crisp and thin. By midday, they had reached a vantage point from which they could see the valley below. Dakota pointed to a thin line of movement in the distance. Soldiers, he said, following tribe's trail east, maybe 20 men. Sarah's heart clenched. Will your people be safe? They will lead soldiers in circles for days, Dakota replied with quiet confidence. then disappear like morning mist. And the Mitchells? Dakota scanned the terrain carefully before answering. 3 riders headed north, following our trail. Fear seized her, but Sarah forced it down. How far behind? Half day, maybe less. Dakota's expression remained calm. We have advantage. Know these mountains. They do not. They continued northward, occasionally doubling back or crossing streams to confuse their trail. Dakota moved with the sure-footed confidence of a man born to this land, finding paths where Sarah saw only wilderness, spotting game that her eyes missed entirely. By late afternoon, they had descended into a narrow canyon where a small river tumbled over smooth stones. We camp here, Dakota announced, helping Sarah dismount. Water will hide our scent. Rocks will hide our fire. As Dakota prepared a shelter using branches and a small tarp he'd carried, Sarah tended to Thomas, changing his wrappings and feeding him. The baby had been remarkably quiet throughout their journey, as if sensing the need for stealth. Now he gurgled contentedly, reaching for Sarah's face with tiny fingers. He grows stronger each day, Dakota observed, returning with several fish he'd speared in the river. Will be great warrior someday. Sarah smiled, watching as Dakota prepared the fish with practiced efficiency. Or perhaps a healer like Najoni. He always quiets when she sings to him. Warrior can be healer too, Dakota replied. Best leaders know both war and peace. As they ate, Sarah studied Dakota's profile in the fading light. The stern lines of his face had softened somewhat in recent days, at least when he spoke to her. She had come to recognize the subtle shifts in his expression that revealed his thoughts, the slight crinkling around his eyes when something amused him, the barely perceptible tightening of his jaw when he was concerned. Why did you really help me that day by the pond? She asked suddenly. The truth. Dakota was silent for a long moment, staring into the small, carefully banked fire. I told truth. Saw woman in need, child in danger. There must be more, Sarah pressed gently. You risked everything. You're standing with your people, their safety. No one does that for a stranger. His dark eyes lifted to meet hers. When I saw what they did to you, cutting your hair, casting you out with newborn child, I saw old cruelty wearing new face. He hesitated. My first wife, Kimmy, died at hands of white soldiers. They took her when I was hunting, used her, left her for dead. Sarah's breath caught. I'm so sorry. Dakota shook his head. Not your doing. His voice was low, controlled, but Sarah could hear the old pain beneath the words. When I found you, I saw a chance to fight old wrong, not with weapon, but with kindness. The simple honesty of his answer moved her deeply. Before she could respond, Dakota suddenly stiffened, his head turning sharply toward the canyon's entrance. In one fluid motion, he extinguished the fire and moved to Sarah's side. Riders, he whispered. 3 men, coming up canyon. Fear closed Sarah's throat. The Mitchells? Dakota nodded, already gathering their few belongings. We must move, now. Sarah clutched Thomas to her chest, her heart hammering as Dakota led them deeper into the canyon, where the walls narrowed to form a crevice just wide enough for a person to slip through. Behind this natural barrier lay a small cave, hidden from view by dense underbrush. Stay here, Dakota instructed, positioning her in the deepest part of the cave. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, protect Thomas. The intensity in his eyes sent a chill through her. What are you going to do? Lead them away from you. He pressed his knife into her hand. If I do not return by morning, follow river north. 2 days' walk to Bitterroot settlement. Before she could protest, he was gone, slipping through the crevice like a shadow. Sarah huddled in the darkness, one hand covering Thomas's mouth to stifle any cries, the other clutching Dakota's knife. Outside, she could hear the approaching riders, their voices carrying in the still canyon air. "Tracks lead this way," a man called out. "Fresh ones, can't be more than an hour ahead." Sarah recognized the voice with a jolt of terror. Richard Mitchell, James's older brother, the same man who had held her arms while their mother cut her hair. Sarah pressed deeper into the shadows, her body curved protectively around Thomas. The baby seemed to sense her fear, remaining unnaturally still against her chest. Outside, hoofbeats slowed to a stop. "There was a campfire here," another voice said. William Mitchell, the youngest brother, barely 18, but already hardened by his family's influence. "Still warm." "Spread out," Richard commanded. "The savage can't have gone far, and where he is, that Mitchell whelp will be too." A third voice joined in, unfamiliar to Sarah. "What about the woman? Your mother said she was unstable, dangerous. Could be she's already—" "She's alive," Richard cut in sharply. "And she'll answer for stealing my brother's heir." From somewhere further up the canyon came a sound, a deliberate rustling, followed by the snap of a branch. Sarah's heart pounded so violently she feared they might hear it. "There!" William shouted. "Up the North Ridge!" The thunder of hoofbeats resumed as the men charged in pursuit of the noise. Sarah exhaled shakily, clutching Thomas tighter. Takoda had successfully drawn them away, but for how long, and at what risk to himself? 3 armed men against 1, the odds chilled her blood. Minutes stretched into an hour as Sarah waited in the stifling darkness of the cave. Thomas began to fuss, hungry and uncomfortable. She nursed him quickly, straining to hear any sound from outside. The canyon had fallen silent save for the gentle rush of the river. Just as Sarah began to wonder if she should attempt to leave, a pebble clattered near the cave entrance. She froze, knife raised, ready to defend her child with her last breath. "Sarah," Takoda's voice was barely audible. "It is safe now." And relief washed through her as she made her way to the entrance. Takoda stood there, silhouetted against the early evening sky. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, and a thin line of blood trailed down his arm, but he was alive. "You're hurt," she whispered, reaching toward the wound. "Small cut, nothing more." He helped her through the narrow crevice. "We must move quickly. They will realize soon they follow false trail." "You didn't kill them?" Sarah asked, surprised. Takoda's expression was solemn. "Death brings more death, always. I led them in circles, then back towards soldier camp. They will waste many hours." They retrieved the horse from where Takoda had hidden it and continued northward, following the river as it wound through increasingly rugged terrain. They traveled through the night, stopping only when necessary to rest the horse or tend to Thomas. Dawn found them crossing a high mountain pass, the air so thin that Sarah's breath came in short gasps. "Look," Takoda said as they crested the ridge. Below them spread a vast valley, greener and more lush than the arid lands they had left behind. "Bitterroot Valley. We cross into different territory now. Mitchell men have no power here." "Is it safe?" Sarah asked, trying to keep the exhaustion from her voice. "Safer," Takoda corrected. "There is trading post 2 days north. Man who runs it, Mackenzie, is fair to Apache. We can rest there before deciding where to go next." "And where is that?" Sarah asked, suddenly realizing she had never considered beyond escape. "Where do we go from here, Takoda?" He turned to her, his dark eyes meeting hers with unexpected warmth. "Where do you want to go?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibilities neither had voiced. Sarah looked down at Thomas, now sleeping peacefully in his cradleboard, then back at Takoda, this man who had risked everything for them. "I don't know," she admitted. "I can't go back to Blackwater Creek. But I don't belong with your people either, not truly. You belong where you choose to belong," Takoda said simply. "Apache believes spirit chooses its own path." A thought occurred to her. "What about your people? Your father? Will you return to them?" Takoda's gaze shifted to the valley below. My father knew when we parted that I might not return. He gave his blessing. For what? Sarah asked, her heart suddenly beating faster. For new path, if that is what spirits choose. His eyes found hers again. If that is what you choose. The implication of his words struck Sarah with the force of revelation. He wasn't simply helping her escape. He was offering her a future, offering Thomas a father. I don't want you to feel obligated, she said softly. You've already done more than I could ever repay. Obligation is white man's word, Dakota replied, reaching out to touch her cheek with gentle fingers. Apache have different word. Means I carry gratitude in my heart, but also means my path is joined with yours. As the sun rose higher over the Bitterroot Valley, Sarah felt something unfurl within her chest, something she had thought died with James, or perhaps had never truly existed before now. Mackenzie's trading post stood alone in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, its weathered log walls and wide porch a welcome sight after 2 days of hard travel. A wisp of smoke curled from the stone chimney, promising warmth within. Sarah's legs trembled with exhaustion as Dakota helped her dismount. Thomas, remarkably resilient throughout their journey, blinked sleepily in the afternoon light. The walnut dye on Sarah's skin had begun to fade in patches, but at a distance she still passed as Apache, especially in her native dress, with her hair now adorned with small braids Dakota had woven during their brief rests. The door of the trading post swung open, and a burly man with a thick grey beard emerged, rifle in hand. His wary expression softened when he recognized Dakota. Well now, didn't expect to see you this far north, he called out in a deep, booming voice. His sharp eyes took in Sarah and the baby. And with company, no less. Need shelter, Mackenzie, Dakota replied. And news of soldiers, Mitchell men. The trader leaned his rifle against the doorframe, a gesture of trust that Sarah didn't miss. Come inside then. Looks like you've traveled hard. The interior of the trading post was warm and cluttered, shelves laden with supplies ranging from ammunition to bolts of calico. A pot of stew bubbled on the hearth, filling the air with a savory aroma that made Sarah's mouth water. Mackenzie gestured for them to sit at a rough-hewn table while he filled bowls with the steaming liquid. Mitchell men came through 2 days ago, he said without preamble. 3 of them, asking after a white woman and baby traveling with an Apache. He glanced pointedly at Sarah's dyed skin, told them I hadn't seen any white women in months. They headed east toward Fort Madison. Relief flooded through Sarah. Thank you. Mackenzie nodded. Don't know your story, don't need to, but those men had meanness in their eyes. He set the bowls before them. You can stay in the back room tonight, no charge. That evening, after Thomas had been fed and settled to sleep on a pallet in the small storage room Mackenzie had offered them, Sarah and Dakota sat before the dying fire in the trading post's main room. The trader had retired to his quarters upstairs, leaving them alone with their thoughts. What now? Sarah asked, the question that had hovered between them since cresting the ridge into Bitterroot Valley. Dakota's expression was thoughtful in the firelight. Mackenzie says there is homestead for sale, 10 miles north. Previous owner died last winter. Good land, stream nearby. A homestead? Sarah echoed, surprised. You would live in a white man's house? Farm white man's way. Not white man's way, Dakota corrected gently. Not Apache way either. Our way. He reached for her hand, his touch warm and sure. Thomas needs place where he is not Mitchell, not Apache, just Thomas. Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. And us? What would we be to each other? What do you want us to be? Dakota's gaze held hers, unflinching. In that moment, Sarah knew. The man before her had crossed boundaries of culture and prejudice to save her, had risked his life for her child. had offered her not just safety but dignity. What had begun as rescue had transformed into something profound, a connection neither had sought, but both now cherished. "I want us to be family," she whispered, "for Thomas, for ourselves." Takoda's smile, rare and beautiful, lit his face. "Then we are family." 5 years later, a small homestead nestled in the northern reaches of the Bitterroot Valley had become known to travelers and locals alike as a place of unusual harmony. There, a woman with auburn hair now grown past her shoulders worked alongside her husband, a tall Apache whose dignity and fairness had earned the respect of even the most prejudiced settlers. Their son, nearly 6 now, raced across the yard with the boundless energy of childhood, his laughter mingling with that of his 2 younger sisters, one with her mother's green eyes, one with her father's solemn grace. Sarah Mitchell, now Sarah Takoda, watched from the porch as her husband taught Thomas to notch an arrow to his small bow. The boy's face, neither fully white nor Apache but perfectly his own, was alight with concentration. "Careful, little warrior," Takoda instructed. "Feel the wind before you release." On Sarah's lap, baby Kimmy gurgled happily, reaching for her mother's necklace, a simple pendant of carved bone and turquoise that had once symbolized belonging and now symbolized home. The scars of the past remained. Sarah still woke sometimes from nightmares of shearing scissors and accusing voices, but they had faded like the walnut dye that had once darkened her skin. What remained was stronger, a family forged not through blood or obligation, but through choice and love.